Thank you, Joshua. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Great, guys. We'll move to our panel. Just a second. I want to see that our panelists are here. You can turn on your video and microphone. Yes. Hey, everyone.
Hey there, Ben.
Hey.
Hi there.
Okay, we're ready for who's responsible for what panel. I hope you have some thoughts about what Joshua just discussed, and we can elaborate on that also. So we have a group of experts here today with us, and I'm not gonna read the full bios because it's gonna take the whole time. I'm just gonna highlight some key points on who you are, and then I'll give you the floor to introduce yourselves. So let's get started. I'll start with Noga Rosenthal, the General Counsel and Chief Privacy Officer at Ampersand. She has more than 15 years in experience in global privacy, compliance, and public policy, including shaping privacy industry standards and advising on federal privacy legislation. Dr. Catalina Goanta, Associate Professor in Private Law and Technology from Utrecht University. She also leads Humanites, a research initiative focused on understanding the impact of content monetization on social media, and works with the European Commission on digital consumer protection. Dr. Ravit Dotan, an AI ethics advisor, researcher, and speaker. Ravit specializes in helping tech companies, investors, and policymakers to develop responsible AI frameworks and strategies. Dr. Giovanni de Gregorio is a PLMJ chair in law and technology in Cattolica Global School of Law, a legal expert in constitutional law, digital policy, and AI governance, and the author of Digital Constitutionalism in Europe. Last but not least, Hadassah Drukarch, the Director of Policy and Delivery at the Responsible AI Institute. Hadassah focuses on AI governance, certification, and regulatory strategy, helping organizations implement responsible AI practices. And before I hand it over to you, to the five of you, we have both a chat and a Q&A section as part of the Zoom meeting. I'm not sure we're gonna have enough time to review all the questions, but if anyone has questions, you can put them there. Now I'd like to invite you to briefly introduce yourself. And Noga, let's start with you, and then please pass it along to the next panelist.
Sure. Again, I'm Noga Rosenthal. I'm at a ad tech TV company here in New York. And again, Ben, just I think one of the differentiators with me is that I've been in self-reg for a long time, which I think may impact AI, where companies set up their own rules because laws can't keep up. Ravit, I'll turn it to you.
Hi. Yeah, I work in the field of AI governance. So I cover all range of issues. What should organizations be doing? Regulations and standards, risks, mitigations. I do it under two hats. One is consulting and advising to all kinds of organizations in all sectors. And the other is research to learn empirically and from previous work, you know, what is it that we should be doing?
Mm-hmm. Who are you choosing, Ravit, to pass the torch?
Giovanni.
That's my turn. Thank you so much. Of course, pleasure to be here. And I'm Giovanni, and actually, first of all, I'm an academic working actually on the problems related to the regulation of digital technologies related particularly, to the role of online platforms and all the problems and issues and opportunities that comes with the intersection with fundamental rights, the problem exercise related to the exercise of powers, by public and private actors, and what it means for constitutional democracy. So basically, this is my area that goes, in so many different directions, of course, from, questions related to AI governance, to data protection, even to free speech, and, you can even just imagine if you're here, I don't need to say more than that. And then Catalina.
Thank you so much, Giovanni. Hi, Ben. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm Catalina Goanta. I'm an associate professor at Utrecht University. I work very much on social media governance, so AI used in social media, but also broader on regulation and European regulation, as we have heard, is a little bit of a controversial topic these days, and I hope that we can jump into that later on. But also what I bring to my research is a background in consumer protection and a lot of lessons that we can learn from that in terms of AI regulation. And perhaps, let's see, Hadassah, yeah.
Yes, that leaves me. Thank you so much, Catalina. And lovely to meet everyone. Thanks, Ben, of course, for the invitation. Looking forward to this session. So my name is Hadassah Drukarch. I'm the Director of Policy and Delivery at the Responsible AI Institute, coming into this discussion with a very similar background to, I think, or at least in terms of what I do, to what Ravit just mentioned, right? Helping organizations with their AI governance programs and implementing the different mechanisms, policies, processes, and practices that they need on the ground. We are a member-based nonprofit, and so I work directly with a lot of organizations, mainly enterprise, but across a very large range of industries, including healthcare, energy, finance, etc. And so I will bring kind of that perspective to this conversation, right? Like how are organizations actually operating on the ground, right? Back to you, Ben.
Cool. Cool, guys. So let's dive into the panel. I want to start with what excites you the most, because we all the time we focus on, or not all the time, but a lot of us, I'm sorry, the panel here. Yes, now I see it. We talk about the risk and the challenges of AI, but let's start with good, and let's start with what excites you the most. And I want to start with Noga and Catalina. And Noga, you work in industries where AI plays a huge role. What an example of AI that's being used in a way that excites you the most?
Sure. So for our industry, the advertising industry, it's helping to personalize ads. But that's been going on, Ben, for years. So, it's just taking your information, whatever you're doing on the web, and saying, okay, you may be interested in buying a car or taking a trip to France. Having said that, I think there's also room for to use AI in privacy. Maybe not needing such personal information, maybe not needing all of your history web browsing history to create a profile on you, which again is so sensitive. So I think for me personally, it's that part of it, the privacy part, that's the most exciting. Again, in the advertising industry where there's a lot of scrutiny around what we're doing. On a personal level, though, I studied for certification in AI this past month, and I used ChatGPT to test myself, to learn new ideas. So that I've really been enjoying using that, just saving time and learning new things.
Yeah, I agree. For education is amazing. Catalina, for you, you're a researcher in content creation and influencer law. What do you think about advertising and media? And is there a new creative methods that we can harness with AI? Is AI enable us to do more creative stuff than before? What are the opportunities that you see in that?
So there's definitely, just to build on what Noga was also saying, there's definitely an opportunity here. And I think the creator industry is very much trying to understand how they can use generative AI, for instance, in content creation. Of course, that also comes with a lot of fears because there's going to be copyright issues. There's going to be a lot of problems also with the authenticity of creators, because this is one of the most important things in the creator economy. But perhaps parking this type of application for a second, I'd like to perhaps also go back to a question of research. And we're going to hear very soon from Arvin Narayanan. And I saw a tweet that he did, I think it was yesterday, and he was referring to how AI can also help in the actually in the research field. So not in the legal research field, but generally with research, because he was saying that overproduction, so people are actually doing too much research nowadays. And he's saying, well, actually AI could also write some of these papers for us. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I do believe that there are a lot of opportunities in legal research for different types of language models to be used for very specific tasks. And Ben, you have been also at our natural legal language processing workshop last year. So it's a very nice interdisciplinary workshop for those of you who do not know it, that focuses very much on the use of large language models and just language models in general before, you know, there was this entire hype with LLMs and OpenAI. With very specific tasks, such as, you know, summarization or different types of information extraction. And I think for the legal field, so for practice, but also for research, this can really lead to very specific tasks that can make our life better. For instance, imagine maybe a literature review that could give some initial information, which you can then double check. And this is, I think, also something that a judge from the UK, it was an appellate judge, who was saying, I'm using ChatGPT to make an overview of a field of law. I know that field of law, I can check it, so I can absolutely evaluate if what I'm getting is good or bad, but I'm just not bothered summarizing it. So I think that there's a lot of potential there.
Yeah, I agree. And Ravit, I wanna hear your perspective here about how we treat AI as in human-like terms. And I think nowadays, when agents it's not just ChatGPT now, we use agent, and we want them to do job for us or some work for us. And so I think this maybe the challenges here might be even more, and we need to address that. But is it from, I don't know, from a philosophical perspective and from a research perspective and from your experience, what do you stance on that? Is AI changing the way we think about intelligence, creativity, or even trust? And what do you think about humans treat AI as in human-like terms?
Yeah, okay, there's a lot in this question, and I'm kind of thinking, what's the best angle for it? Yeah, there's definitely this tendency to think of chatbots, or people want to call them agents, as you've mentioned, but to treat bots as kind of humanoids. And it's really natural, because that's how the communication goes, right? They are purposefully designed to make it feel very similar to the way that we interact with other people. And even, you know, myself, even though I know better, right? When I interact with a chatbot, I almost feel like I'm talking to someone else. And, you know, what I found is that when I think about it I mean, it's misleading, right? So that's the first problem. It's misleading, and it can lead to, you know, a host of issues that we've seen, right? People get advice from chatbots to, you know, jump off the Golden Gate Bridge, right? Or, you know, we do have this kid who committed suicide. Not funny. I'm laughing because it's so bad. It's the only way to deal with that. You know, treat it as a psychologist, treat it like a girlfriend. There are a lot of risks there, but I want to talk about how natural this tendency is. I mean, they are designed, right, to make us see that. And the second point I want to mention is that I think overcoming this tendency could go through understanding that we can get more use out of them if we don't see them that way. I'll give an example. So for me, as I said, it's very natural also to kind of feel as if I'm talking to another person who's giving me advice, who's serving as a sounding board. But when I do that, I find that my products are actually less good. Right? I think we're all still learning how to use generative AI, and I am too. For me, one of the uses is for accelerating writing processes and creating fictional scenarios, like when I need case studies, for example. And what I find is that when I'm stuck on this imagination that I'm talking with someone else, first of all, I get annoyed. Like, why isn't it doing it correctly? I told it to do it this way, not that way, right? But then also I'm like, this is not the advice that I need. It's frustrating. So recently I switching to this other mindset where I am just using it as a tool to fail faster. And so I always start with my own ideas, right? And one method that I use, I'll record myself, transcribe it, right? And then I'll just like bloop all of my ideas, just like sort them out, like organize them, right? And I might ask, yeah, like what's an outline? And it needs to be, you know, in the style of this or that, because sometimes I need to write in different styles, right? And then it will give me something, and I consider it as me failing faster, right? Because when you write something, you'll do an outline. The first one will be bad. The second one will also be bad. The third one, slightly less bad, right? But when you do it just by yourself, right, it will take a while, and you'll need to develop it more and until you see how bad it is, right? So you'll need to write the paragraphs, right? So I'm using it. This is just me, all me, failing faster. Give me the outline, write a thing. Oh, this is so terrible. I can't do that, right? So for me, the switch to this is not someone else I'm talking to, this is me failing faster, is both helping me get better products and protecting me from this illusion that I do think is harmful, that we're talking to some kind of humanoid.
It's interesting to understand what is the company's intentions in that, whether they want you to think and to think you talk to a human like, or for them in a business perspective, what is maybe it's better for them to convey you that it's just a tool, just another computer, another brain that you can use. And I want to bring Hadassah to this panel, and like you work with organizations and to implement responsible AI, and I'm really curious because we discussed this before. What is your definition to really responsible AI from your perspective, from your experience? Because there is a lot of terms and definitions there. Maybe you can touch on the practical approach that you see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for that, it's a really interesting question. To follow up on something Ravit just said, right? I think in terms of that interaction with these, let's say an AI chatbot, right? It's really context dependent. Context dependent, and I think outcome dependent also. Just to give one example, which just made me smile as you were talking, is yesterday evening, I working on a different project, transcriptions, inputted it into ChatGPT, had an outcome that I wanted to reach. And I actually wanted to know what the prompt was that ChatGPT thought I could best ask to get to the outcome so that I could do this with all the other transcripts that I had. And so it came to the conclusion, gave me a prompt. I tried it on another transcript. And a conversation between me and ChatGPT started where it kind of came to an outcome that wasn't based on the transcript that I had, but I was interested. So I asked it. Previously, when I would ask it, it would say, oh, sorry, that you're right, this wasn't included in the transcript or something like that. Or it would say something like, so let's say like an oops, this was an oops moment, essentially. But it actually came back with a response. The day ended, and I went to my husband and said to him, I actually had a really great conversation. He was like, oh, yeah, with ChatGPT yesterday. And in that moment, you kind of realize like how you're interacting with that system. But I think the context, and that's where I'll bring it to what responsible AI is, the context and the outcome really matter there. Because I could talk to my mother, I could talk to my brother, I could talk to a friend, and they could also like tell me something that I shouldn't necessarily rely on in that context. And the same applies to ChatGPT here, right? So I think you need to understand the scenario that's around it. You need to understand what the outcome is that you're looking at. And you also need to understand the context. And per context, it may be different. And that applies to responsible AI as well. So I think there as well, what responsible AI is, it's highly context dependent. And I think when you work in this space, and maybe that applies to all of us, you tend to think only in terms of these, how you see this concept until you realize that it has many, many different meanings across different contexts, across different organizations working with it in different ways. But just to kind of instill my thoughts in terms of what I think responsible AI is, the bottom line, and I think it's driven by mitigation of risks, is that AI is developed, deployed, and used in a way that benefits individuals and society at large, alongside benefiting companies, right? Going back to those benefits that we were talking about before, not only individuals, but also companies and organizations obviously use this to enhance their efficiency and make their work better for themselves and for those that are using it. I think beyond risk mitigation, that's one component of it. I do think there's a component to responsible AI that is seen more as a business, like a business case. So there's a lot more to it than saying, hey, there are harms involved in AI, we need to mitigate those. But also if we put responsible AI governance at the forefront of what we do, we can leverage it to get the right people on board, to establish the right culture within their company, to actually build better products. Going to the conversation we were talking about just before, to create more trust. And there's research conducted on how responsible AI is tied to revenue and profit increases and culture building and the like. And so anyway, how we see this at the Responsible AI Institute is that because for those reasons and the fact that there are so many different factors involved, it is a very multidimensional and also cross-functional effort at its core that includes, you know, the consideration for various outcomes, including risk mitigation, but also these others that depend on the organization that you're working with. I'll go into details on like kind of what that looks like from a governance perspective, but I think the context is really key there.
Yeah, I agree. And Giovanni, I want to bring you to that to continue that. First, what do you think is responsible AI from your perspective? And maybe you can add your constitutional or international law and states law to this talk. And essentially, if I'm relating to what Ravit said and Hadassah said, one question that I want to add to you, if you can comment, is maybe we want more than we can achieve from AI. We want it to be very safe, very responsible. We want to integrate it safely and responsible. But is it even possible? What do you think about that?
Thanks. That's kind of an interesting discussion because whenever we talk about responsible AI, whenever we talk about fairness, whenever we talk about trustworthiness, whenever we talk about ethics of AI, we hear a lot of things around these concepts, you know, and different voices from, you know, philosophers, computer scientists, lawyers, and, you know, like practitioners and so many other different people. The point is actually when we put these things in practice, no matter how we see the world, how this should look like according to ethical principles, things are very different, you know? And the things actually that is quite interesting to say, even if you think about, yes, that we'd like to see the peace in the world and whatever we want, actually, when we look even just at two examples of constitutional democracies, you know, I mean, at least European countries and the US, you find a completely different, you know, like point of view. So whenever we talk about how AI should be responsible, you know, what are the ethical principles that should apply to, you know, to whatever, to an autonomous vehicles or even in content moderation, it's also Catalina is here, you know? So, I mean, we are far from each other, you know? We're talking about two constitutional democracies that see, you know, the same thing as in two different ways, one as a problem and the other as an opportunity. And as far as we are going to see the world in this very polarized way, we'll never get anywhere, you know? So whenever we are going to continue talking about, yes, responsible AI, what does it mean? But then when we look at the policies or even at the legislation, since we talk about that at the beginning, we see like an ocean, you know, between the two places around the world, you know, but sure, I mean, we're still even speaking about constitutional democracy. So, you know, places where, you know, you could speak about the rule of law, places where you could speak about transparency, and these things should be, you know, on the same level. The fact is that it's not. So, I mean, and there are a lot of voices around that, you know, way I should look like. The fact is that, I mean, whatever we think about, when we look in practice how things are managed in terms of policies, I mean, this distance is embarrassing, to be fair, you know? So, and this actually raise a lot of questions that goes definitely beyond, you know, the realm of constitutional democracies that go more about who actually has the power to shape whom, you know? And I mean, in terms also even of industrial policy, and I don't need to add anything on that because it's quite clear, you know? And so, I mean, and this, of course, leads, of course, the EU to play a certain type of role of regulator, of course, for obvious reasons. But at a certain time, even don't think that the EU, you know, is not up to a certain point, is more aware of the situation at the moment. If you see the recent adoption of the competitiveness compass was precisely a little bit of a wake-up call up to a certain point to say, you know, guys, I mean, we care a lot about democratic values and fundamental rights, and I think that the EU will continue towards this road, but it's not just in digital policy. You can see even in environmental law, you see many other fields, you know, like but this does not mean, like that still, I mean, we do not need to find a balance between, like how we want to protect rights in a constitutional democracies and how we want to ensure a little bit that we have also some things that are also possible elsewhere, So that is a little bit the constitutional challenges we are living. But I do not see that whenever, just to close, because otherwise it's too long, my answer, whenever actually we see talks about responsible AI, we need to understand where we are in the world, because this could mean very, very different things, not to mention even opposite things wherever we are in the world. And I really care that we need this fair and open conversation about that, rather than, always falling within, what an autonomous vehicle should look or how this information should be provided online.
Yeah, I agree. And I want to ask Catalina and then Noga. Catalina, we discussed before about the new guidelines by the European Commission, and I'm curious to hear what is the EU currently doing in this space. And after that, Noga, what is from the industry perspective in a global company, how responsible AI looks like? And to take what Giovanni just mentioned. It can't look the same in every place, in every company, in every country, in every state. And maybe we need to tailor-made the responsible AI practices. So I'll start with Catalina and then I'll go to Noga.
Thanks so much. I think that's such an important point. And also just to build on what Giovanni was saying when we're speaking about AI regulation, because we have some guidelines from the European Commission that were just published recently on the basis of the AI Act. Giovanni has written also a lot about the AI Act. So we have this piece of regulation right now, which is monumental in the European Union, that was passed last year. And it's supposed to start being applicable in phases up until 2027, I believe it was. And it's really going to even increase, the already quite heavy duties of companies. Although I do have to say that I very fundamentally disagree with what Joshua was saying earlier, that you just can't open a company in the European Union. You definitely can, but of course, then I think also what Giovanni was saying, there are different types of values that are embedded in regulation. And I have a few points here. So the first one is that it's very important when we speak about the regulation of AI to keep in mind, what jurisdiction we're talking about. That's what Giovanni was also saying. Different jurisdictions are going to have different values that they give priority to. So is innovation going to be more important than the safety of citizens? Because if we're looking at the guidelines that were published on one specific article of the AI Act, and that's Article 5. Article 5 is about prohibited practices. So the AI Act works with different layers of risk. And then we have this really super humongous level of risk where the European Union now is saying we're just going to prohibit certain practices. And examples are going to include social scoring or risk assessment in terms of criminal offenses, and basically, the typical Compass example. And these are things that have been thought through because they're supposed to protect different citizens, different consumers. Maybe just to finalize the points for now, this type of regulation has its own value because we do have to consider the types of risks that such technologies pose. We also, I think that it was, I think Noga was mentioning this earlier, that, we see that regulation is always really falling behind. And the AI Act is definitely an example of regulation that is thinking very much into the future. Although, and I leave this in a kind of a little bit of a mysterious conclusion, when we see that the US is now really pivoting to a very strong AI policy and also a lot of investments done in this field or to be done in this field, we see DeepSeek. The question is, we do have these values in the European Union. We have the AI Act, but what are we going to do with it if we're going to be caught in between geopolitical forces that might go beyond the political power of the EU to actually enforce it as the initial plan was?
Catalina, I would just, build off of that for global companies, they're going to be offering their services likely in Europe, right? So that's what happened to us with GDPR. We had offices in Europe. We had clients using us in Europe. We had consumers that were impacted by us in Europe. So we had to comply with we had to comply with GDPR. Same principle applies here. So again, I appreciate what Josh is saying, but I think if you look at your company and how your executives are going to want to roll out their product in Europe too. They're likely not going to say, okay, I'm not going to roll this out in Europe. So that may be the baseline that you're using anyway. And then there's going to be competitive factors that if your competitor is doing this and you're not complying with the law, or you're not up to their standards, and you're just, for instance, a US-based company, that may impact you too, because then why would I use you when I could use a safer product that's been, that's complying with the EU Act? So I think I appreciate what he was saying, but I think lessons learned, like, hey, you know what, GDPR like principles came to the US too, and those of us that had complied with the GDPR were ready for it in the US as well.
Interesting. Interesting. And Hadassah, maybe you can touch on that point. You probably worked with both companies, I don't know, from Europe and US, and one of the things I'm thinking of is our company truly stepping to take responsibility when AI-driven decisions go wrong and they implement or when they implement AI in their products, or there is a lot of responsible AI washing. I don't know if there is a term for that. Responsible AI washing, maybe should be talking about responsibility, but they're not doing. They're not taking real accountability.
I'll just chime in. It's called AI ethics washing.
AI ethics washing. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. So yeah, we work with honestly mainly companies right now that are based in North America, and so we have some outside of the North American sphere. But I think it's actually very interesting working with those organizations. So I come from the Netherlands, and I have had experience working privacy and data protection there. And so working mainly with European organizations, and I remember kind of how that went back then. I do think the EU AI Act is somewhat different, at least like because it's so early days still in terms of what the impact is. And I'm hearing from a lot of organizations that I am talking to now in the Netherlands that they are seeing that, and across Europe in general, that they're seeing the sentiment across the organization itself. So not necessarily like the professionals that we're talking about that we're speaking, in this group right now, but the broader organization, leadership, and others don't see AI or the AI Act and all the regulation that's being developed around that necessarily as a compliance activity. They're seeing it more as a broader strategic opportunity. At least that's how I've understood it, coming from kind of that discussion. And so everyone wants to be at the table. So from what I've heard, like a lot, and I see that in the organizations that we work in the US with as well, a lot of people are very excited across the organization to hear more about responsible AI, is to understand what governance means, how they need to drive that within the organization. Whereas I think previously with privacy and data protection, it was very much what programs do we need to put in place, do it, like whatever you need to do, go for it. But like it wasn't as much of a collective process. Now I'm looking at the rest of course, and Noga, maybe you in particular, right? And your experience working in practice. But those are the things that I've been hearing in terms of actually implementing AI governance within organizations. We take on a maturity-based approach. And I think it's important to do that because what mature means is very relative, not only to the industry, but also to the organization itself. We work with companies in energy, for instance, and each and every single one of them is different. And so the mere fact that they work in the energy sector or healthcare, for instance, right, quite a regulated sector of finance, doesn't mean that they have everything in order. Sure, they have that experience in different areas with more strict rules, but it really is driven by leadership within an organization on many fronts at this point, what's being done with AI. And that's because it's such a big topic that touches so many different practitioners and departments within an organization. So I'm not sure kind of like to what extent that really answers your question, Ben, but I do think that in practice, we're seeing a lot of different things. And I just think there's a shift in terms of how AI regulations approached, as opposed to how previous regulations in this space, which obviously interlink, but have been approached.
Yeah. So I want to go to talk about approaches and ask Ravit about that. But I'll start with Giovanni and maybe Catalina about. I read your paper about recent paper, I think, structural asymmetric in digital markets. It was really fascinating. And Giovanni, I discussed with you on the power shift, and maybe you can start talking about these two, because AI, well, as we understand, is giving us a lot of opportunities, but there is a lot of imbalances between tech companies and users. So what policy or mechanism do you think is most urgent to really ensure that AI is not exploiting more consumer vulnerabilities. And it's, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Since this is a conversation, I'm not going to answer, this question, for one reason, because I mean, Catalina probably that comes after me this time, she could say something on consumer and the users, because what I wanted to stress now, that one of the important imbalance we are not talking about enough, it's the imbalance between the state and, in the governance of AI, because of course, I mean, users, definitely we are in a situation where we do not count that much, when it comes to AI governance. I mean, even of course, there are some exceptions in the past, even if you think about some cases have shown like that users can count when they can coalesce or create some groups, but that's another story. It's interesting also to think about the path of connection and dependencies between public and private actors in the digital age. This is pretty much at the core of my research, actually, on digital constitutionalism, that try to underline how the traditional way in which we have been conceiving, like the state and the companies, the private actors and the public actors, is not really there anymore, to be fair, or it's still there institutionally, but when we look at the practice of the thing, I think that the recent US elections have really shown how the incredible and famous public-private divide in the US, it's really there. But I mean, at the end, does not actually preempt any type of contact or very, very strong connection between the public and the private in the US. That's one of the constitutional safeguards that very often characterize also the rule of law. And it's pretty much happening the same in the EU, but with another type of, like, let's say, layout, if you want. If you look at all the co-regulatory processes that are characterizing AI governance in the EU, is nothing else seeing the public and the private increasingly coming together to set the rules that we are users we will be subject to. So this is actually a broader question for, to be fair, for our democratic system, for what we are living, because the imbalance that users are facing, most of the origin of this imbalance is because the state suffer a huge imbalance when it comes to this area, especially when it talks to AI. Of course, not in all sectors, of course, like in military and other stuff, even of course in that case there is public-private collaboration. But still, I think that the imbalance on the users is also the result of a broader imbalance of the state that it made some choices in the last 30 years just to leave the private sector to run some services. And now is realizing, at least the EU has realized, that these services are quite important for the public interest. And so if you leave everything, it's just about goodbye, so you'll never get back. And then they enter the logic of capitalism and so forth. So it's about, for the US, this is nothing new. And I mean, it's, to be fair, it's nothing new, to be fair. It's always been like many of the services in the public interest have always been managed by the private sector. So that's why there is not a constitutional issue for them. Anyway, so that's the world we are living. But I will leave to Catalina also to talk more about the user as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
two sentences on that. So I think that it's very important to consider the opacity of the technology economy, right? So if we're speaking about the development of, for instance, large language models right now, what's the knowledge and what's the literacy of the institutions that are supposed to keep some control on the market? That's the answer to this question is also going to trickle down in consumer protection. And we have seen this even with, very sophisticated business models that did not necessarily rely on technology, and some of them that relied on other technologies than AI, that the law still has a very hard time kind of catching and shaping what these practices are, because we have rules in the European Union that are very similar to the AI Act for other types of business practices. And we have seen that there has been quite a lot of divergence there. So I think that this complexity is only going to complicate matters even further.
Super interesting. And I think one of the challenges was the title of this conversation is who's responsible for what, because what institution is responsible for what types of ethics and standards. And I think it leads me to Ravit, and maybe Ravit, you can help us take to this conversation to a more practical area. Like what organization needs to do, or if you think organization needs to hold any accountability of the product. And I'm pretty sure I know what you think about that. But what do you think organization needs to do, and what you're suggesting to them? And do you see them doing that, or based on your experience?
Yes, I do think organizations need to be proactive. I think it's a shared responsibility. Yeah, the users have responsibility, governments have responsibility, investors, everyone in the ecosystem, but definitely also the organizations who engage in AI in any way, not just developing, procurement, right? Also very important, deployment. So Hadassah mentioned maturity model. Yeah, it's a very strong approach in the field, right? It's not binary, either you're responsible or you're not. It's a journey. And that's something that's really important to understand, because there is this, there can be reluctance and fear, like, oh, it's too much, it's too burdensome, right? But it's fine to do it in stages. What I will say is that the trajectory that we are seeing in the industry, often organizations will start with something like a principles document or a framework, or they might designate someone to be in charge. And, it does make a lot of sense to start with things like that, especially in large organizations. However, the problem is that, you do these steps and they're supposed to be a first step, to actually implementing some practices in the organization. And that's exactly where we see this gap. So what we're seeing is a large portion of organizations doing these things that are, kind of more external facing signals, really, but they're not really doing the implementation part. And we're actually seeing stagnation in the industry. So we have surveys from McKinsey, for example, year after year, it's the same levels of implementation, even though we do see this explosion of frameworks and principles. And so if an organization is serious about its responsibility, not just for its stakeholders, but also for itself, because they understand the business value in it, then they need to tackle this gap. They need to, go into it very informed. As it happens, so I said I'm doing consulting and also research. One of my research projects is exactly on this gap. And you're trying to map the different kind of ways that you see kind of this decoupling between those intentions or the declarations of the organization and what is actually happening in practice. And, just, in a nutshell, what is really maybe most important, notice this gap, measure this gap from implementation. If you do care about the implementation, right? So measure what you treasure, right? Don't just stop at we're going to put a policy, but build in metrics for the level and quality of implementation, and think about it from the organizational perspective. It's a technological problem, but mostly it's an organizational problem, right? So don't forget about these aspects would be my advice.
Yeah, and I want to go to Noga and Hadassah, same question. And Noga, first with you, is there a business value in it? Is it profitable to be responsible? What is your experience in that? Maybe you can share from past, maybe regulations that you experience in data and cybersecurity, maybe, or cloud or others. Yeah.
Sure. So Ben, one of the ways I got buy-in for privacy early on in my career was by showing that our clients were asking questions. So for instance, we would get, people would send us proposals for an advertising campaign and they would have privacy questions. So we started keeping track of how many of those questions are we getting, what are people asking us, and we would take it back to our executives and let them know so that they could see the value in it. So again, when customers are asking questions, it's a great metric for us. And then competition, again, our competitors were putting out papers about GDPR, about differential privacy, all the steps that they were taking. So there was definitely competition there. And for the bigger organizations like Google, Microsoft, it's in their interest to push down those same responsible principles for two reasons. One, customers are going to go to the startups because they're going to have products that you don't have, because they're able to just go quickly, but there's more risk. So you want to make sure that others in the industry understand what you're doing and why, so you could help the startups have the same standards. And then two, you're protecting industry as a whole, right? So if one company gets into trouble, so social media companies getting into trouble in the past caused problems for ad tech in general. So the governments would regulate us with more rules, because we had players in the industry that were doing things maybe that they shouldn't have, because again, they were in that startup phase and they didn't always understand and respect, the risk that was out there. Maybe they just didn't even know. So there's definitely like competitive, just business reasons why to do it. Those are just a couple I could think of.
Yeah, I mean, I echo all the words that you just said, Noga. We come at this topic from exactly the same perspective. It's really interesting to kind of see how a lot of organizations that we work with, well, for context is transparency, right? Transparency is key here. I think transparency towards your customers, transparency towards other stakeholders. And so what we see a lot of companies asking us is, great, we're working on a host of different ways of implementing, right? Bridging that gap that Ravit was just talking about between the principles that we've established and what we do in practice. And so an example that we have is an organization that asked us about that they have some sort of a system in place, some sort of a way of working around proxy variables, bias testing, and kind of detecting fraud. And so they wanted to share that opportunity with us and externally showcase how they've been working on that. And so rather than saying we're publishing our principles externally, it's like we have those principles, we have those frameworks in place. Now we actually want to show how we've done something in practice. Competition is a big point there, absolutely. Questions from customers is a big point there. Research that's being conducted on exactly this topic. And so I think all of those pieces kind of come together, but it is really important not just to go out with those theoretical frameworks, but I think really show kind of what those organizations are doing in practice and be comfortable to share that also. I think that that's still something that we at least see a lot of organizations try to kind of get over, maybe because they feel it's a very binary approach, right? We're either doing well or we're not. And if we go out with one thing, maybe we'll get questions about other things. But well, as we say, we do some assessments with organizations as well. I think that's part of it. We're not going to tell you whether you're doing perfect. We're going to just tell you what you're doing right and where you can improve.
Hadassah, the minute I see somebody say we're 100% compliant with GDPR, I'm like, okay, there's something wrong. And I would say the same with the EU AI. Like it's going to be the same thing. Like when you hear 100% compliance, it's not a good sign.
Yeah, on your page.
I agree. And maybe Giovanni, you can or Catalina, you can take us to, because one of the things I'm thinking right now when Noga and Ravit and Hadassah talked about organization responsibility, what are we missing? Because we can't put all our cards on or all our expectation from organization. We need to have something maybe from other institutions or from the public. What we need to address, and do you think we do it enough? Maybe a short comment on that.
I mean, that's a $1 million question. I mean,
I'm asking you big questions today, Giovanni.
No, I think that what actually has been said is important part of how we are looking at the problems, at the solutions. Let's say, even if it's difficult to talk about solutions, is to that each, since we were talking who is responsible for what, that each of the tile of this mosaic has a responsibility for obvious reason. This is quite naive to say, but of course, the problem is we need to understand which type of responsibility, because of course we know that if you think about users have a certain type of responsibility up to certain points, also, in terms of literacy as well, in terms of being citizens. That's another topic that we have been not talking about, to be fair. And that's another discussion. Of course, states, companies, the responsibility of companies, to be fair, whenever we talk about human rights, business and human rights, the responsibility of a company is always complicated to answer, because in the lack of a very, type of certain regulatory framework or style of obligations, certain company, could find profitable or interesting for its own purpose to follow certain types of rules or SCG, or call it like you want, whatever, the purpose you want to achieve. But that is not, I mean, of course, I mean, if a company wants to just raise money as they can and that is legal, what's the issue? At the end of the day, it's a private actor, is just there for doing money, so for making money. So I don't understand what's the problem, if you think about from a very formalistic perspective, so when you look at the state, that is the most problematic thing, and that is also the most, is where actually people actually profoundly disagree. to be fair, on the role of the state, because no one said that companies, should not make money, and at the same time, that users should not be good citizens. I think that everyone agrees on that. I think, we profoundly disagree on the role of the state, not just to go back on that, but, we disagree because on the one hand, we see the state is always problematic when he wants actually to make, his foot on something that is quite problematic, like speech, for instance, that nowadays has preempted any type of regulatory attempt, especially in the US, to do whatever, even in consumer protection sometimes. But the Catalina is there. But at the same time, for European standards, as you have always understood the role of the state, still, I mean, it's another conversation, So who is responsible for what, especially when it comes to the state, it's very hard to say. Because is the state really responsible to protect, at the end, these fundamental rights? There is a positive obligation, technically speaking, also thinking about the Council of Europe, the European Court of Human Rights, to protect these fundamental rights. Should the state do something, regulate the space? So is there this type of obligation? Because, I mean, if we move to the other side of the Atlantic, the answer is no. Until now. Thanks.
We need to wrap up, but I think we can all agree that this discussion is just in the beginning, and I think before I wrap up, I want to do a speed light speed around to ask you, what is the trends or the thing that you look at 2025 and you hope that we're gonna accomplish as a society, as a community, in the area of responsible AI, or what do you wish we can accomplish, or you say that is already we're doing that. So let's do a quick round and we'll wrap up with that. Maybe Catalina, if you want to start.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say I would love to see us coming back as a global society to cooperative multi-stakeholderism, as opposed to a race to the top where, there's a competition of who's going to develop AI, who's going to become the new economic actor on the basis of that, because I think that that's going to be bad for everyone else. So we definitely need competition. I'm not saying that we don't, but it's important that we move into this direction together as the globe, basically, because these are borderless technologies.
I agree. Who do you pass the torch to?
Giovanni, let's go back the same way.
No, I will be very brief because I spoke too much, to be fair. I agree with Catalina, even of course, the reality of what we are seeing is increasingly polarized. Everyone is taking care about its own competition policy and whatever, as we know. But it's true. I mean, this is very also connected to the idea of creating like a CERN for AI. So like an international institution working together for science and understanding a little bit in computer science for AI. Probably, I mean, this could be an option that we have already a president, so it could see the light of the day, but you never know. So I stop here also to, and moving also to Ravit, please.
Thank you. Okay, so the question is something we can hope to achieve in 2025. I would like to see the end of generative AI hype. I think it is achievable. I think we can do it. I think it's highly important for responsible AI.
Wow, that's a provocative statement.
Okay, maybe I'll just add one more sentence for explanation. I think a lot of people, this hype comes with this notion that this technology is somehow all-powerful, and any kind of problem it might have will magically resolve, such as bias or hallucinations, is just false. But the belief is harmful both for the users who are not bothering to check, and for companies who are also not bothering to check, or saying there's nothing that we should be doing because the foundation model companies are going to solve it. So yes, we can. I believe in us and Gen AI hype. Over to Hadassah.
Well, I'm gonna stay away from those those wishes, but I appreciate that a lot, Ravit. Yeah, that's a really complicated question, Ben. I think there are so many things, and just like being in the United States, and having seen how the year has unpacked since the 20th of January, I think like my perspectives have changed somewhat. What I would say, and I think that applies, we're just talking about it, right? Adopting AI responsibly is a journey, and I think developing the frameworks and the guidance around that from my perspective, right, working with those organizations will be the same. And so what I really hope is that we are able, and this has been mentioned by Catalina before as well, that we're able to take an approach that doesn't reinvent the wheel over and over again. There's so much noise out there. We have to sit around the table and take on, I like to think of it as a product mindset, ask the right questions, listen to the right people, listen to a broad range of people, and then very simply take action in a way that will actually be effective. And maybe that's very simplistic, but I do think bringing together the right minds will be really important. Over to you, Noga.
Yeah, Hadassah, I'm going to talk to that from a company perspective. In order for me to do my job, I need colleagues around me that understand AI and understand how it works, understand how they could use it. If they're not using it and they're not if they're not understand, I have a lot of people who are scared of AI. And so either we're going to get left in the dust, or I'm not going to have colleagues around me that can help me with AI governance. So that to me, the upskilling, just helping people learn new skills is really important. AI literacy, for instance.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you all for this insightful discussion. Really appreciate your time. And as I said, it's we need a full week seminar to touch all of these topics, maybe more than a week to touch all of this. And I hope we'll meet again and discuss this soon. Thank you again. And with that, I'll move